Welcome to The Explainer. We live in a world that is just completely, totally run on data. I mean, every single click, every purchase we make, every step we take with a phone in our pocket, it's all generating these tiny, invisible breadcrumbs of information. It's a reality we've all kind of accepted, right? Usually in exchange for making our lives a little easier. We were promised this incredible world of seamless connection, services that knew exactly what we wanted, and instant access to everything. And look, in a lot of ways, they delivered. But underneath that shiny surface of convenience, a very different story has been playing out. We've been told for years now that this data is valuable, that it's the new oil. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the data we create every single day isn't just some digital exhaust, but it's actually a new form of capital, a genuine means of production, just as powerful and fundamental as money in the bank or the factories that define the last century? Today, we're diving deep into this huge, game-changing idea. We're going to explore how redefining data as capital could let us build a completely new, more resilient, and frankly, more fair economy. It's a journey that'll take us through economic history, into the guts of our digital world, and ultimately to a vision of a future that we can actually help build ourselves. This one idea right here from the book Building the New Economy, it's the bedrock for our entire explainer today. It's a statement that completely reframes our digital world. So let's really unpack what a full-fledged means of production means, because those words have centuries of economic history packed into them. In economics, the means of production are basically the tools you use to create value. For most of history, that was land. Pretty simple. Whoever owned the land, the kings, the feudal lords, they controlled the economy. They held all the power. Then the Industrial Revolution hits, and suddenly the main means of production became industrial capital. The factories, the machines, the assembly lines, the people who owned those things became the new titans of the economy. And of course, money itself, financial capital, became a crucial tool to build even more wealth. For centuries, whoever controlled land, factories, and money, well, they controlled the whole show. This quote is arguing that data has now officially joined that very exclusive club. It's not just a side effect of what we do online, it is the raw material and the machinery of the 21st century economy. It's the essential ingredient for creating everything from the ads we see, to the AIs that can spot diseases, to the shipping networks that get packages to our doorsteps. And if we start thinking about it as a new type of capital, it forces us to ask all the same tough questions we've always asked about money and industry. Who owns it? Who gets to control it? And how is all the immense value it creates being shared? And that, right there, leads us to the biggest, most critical question of all. If this new form of capital, this data capital, is so incredibly valuable, and if it's generated by all of us, together with every single thing we do, why is it all concentrated in the hands of just a tiny number of companies and governments? I mean, think about it. The data isn't born in some corporate server farm. It's created in our living rooms, in our cars, in our hospitals. It's deeply personal. Yet we, the people who actually create it, have almost zero say in how it's used and get practically no share in the incredible wealth it generates. The source material puts it perfectly. Communities that don't have data about themselves and don't have the tools to use that data are basically powerless. They're at the mercy of whoever does have it. This massive concentration of power isn't some abstract economic theory. It has very real, tangible consequences for our privacy, for our opportunities, for our well-being, and even for how our democracy functions. It is the fundamental imbalance that defines our modern world, and it's the central challenge we've got to unpack and figure out how to solve. Okay, so to really get our arms around a solution, we first have to understand the truly unique nature of this new asset. Because before we can talk about redistributing its power, we have to appreciate why it's so different from any type of capital we've ever seen before. It's easy to fall back on simple analogies, but as you're about to see, data is a strange and powerful beast, totally unlike anything our economic systems have ever had to deal with.
I'm sure you've heard this a million times. Data is the new oil. It's catchy, and on the surface, it kind of makes sense, right? Oil is a resource that gets pulled out of the ground, refined, and used to power the economy. But you know what? That analogy is actually really misleading, maybe even dangerous. Oil is a commodity. It's fungible, which is a fancy way of saying 1 barrel of crude oil is pretty much the same as any other. And when you use it, it's gone. Data is the complete opposite. It is, as the source says, a non-fungible production factor. In simple terms, this means that while $1 bill is perfectly replaceable by any other dollar bill, 1 megabyte of data is absolutely not. Let's make that real. A megabyte of your personal health data, your heart rate, your DNA, your medical history, has totally different information and value than a megabyte of your credit card transactions. And that's totally different from a megabyte of your GPS location history or your social media posts. Each dataset tells a unique, specific, context-rich story. And this non-fungibility, this uniqueness, is exactly what makes data so powerful. Its value is in its specificity, which allows for incredible personalization and prediction. But that same quality is also what makes its misuse so incredibly invasive and dangerous. Because the data isn't about some generic resource. It's about you.
So because we haven't really wrapped our heads around how unique data is, the systems we've built to manage it are, to put it nicely, a complete mess. The infrastructure we have today is what the book calls a siloed patchwork. Data is trapped in thousands of different databases that can't talk to each other. Just think about healthcare for a second. Your family doctor has some of your records. The hospital you went to last year has others. Your pharmacy has your prescription history. Good luck getting them all to work together. This broken, fragmented system was absolutely devastating during the recent pandemic. The source points out that survival rates were wildly different from one hospital to another, but it was incredibly hard for doctors to share data in real time to figure out which treatments were actually working. This siloed approach also leads to these one-size-fits-none solutions, where huge national programs don't work because they just don't have the specific local data they need. And what's worse, these systems operate with practically zero transparency. They are completely unauditable. We have no real way of knowing how our data is being used by the algorithms deciding our credit scores, our job applications, or our insurance rates. And all of this just circles back to the main problem. This incredibly powerful asset is concentrated in the hands of a few, leaving the rest of us with these fragile, inefficient, and untrustworthy systems that fail us when we need them most. But here's the thing. While the technology is brand new, this kind of dangerous imbalance of power is actually surprisingly familiar. History gives us a really powerful way to understand what we're going through right now, because believe it or not, we've seen this exact pattern before, over and over again. Whenever a new, game-changing technology comes along, it almost always leads to this period of massive wealth and power getting concentrated in a few hands, before society finally catches up and creates the rules to manage it. If you look back through modern history, you see that huge technological shifts and global crises have repeatedly forced us to totally reinvent the social contract, the rules of the game between people, companies, and the government. Let's look at these moments. The rise of mass manufacturing back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It created unbelievable wealth, sure, but it also led to brutal working conditions, child labor, and these massive monopolies that could just steamroll any competition. After decades of struggle and the crisis of World War I, society pushed back hard, and we got protections we now totally take for granted: the 40-hour work week, workplace safety laws, food safety standards, and antitrust rules to break up those monopolies. Then, after World War II, the world rebalanced again. The whole idea of colonialism was exposed as bankrupt, empires fell, and the fight for civil rights and women's rights started to redraw the map of power inside countries. And then, when the biotech revolution conquered diseases like polio, it wasn't enough just to have the vaccine. Disasters like the thalidomide scandal, where a drug caused horrible birth defects, showed us we had to create tough new standards for medical testing and approval, like the FDA, to build public trust. Every single time, a new power emerged, and every single time, society had to invent new rules to bring things back into balance. The data and AI revolution is our moment. It's our crisis, our technological shift, and it demands its own great rebalance.
And this is where the parallel becomes almost uncanny. Just think about the Gilded Age in the late 1800s. You had a handful of industrial and financial barons, the Rockefellers with oil, the Carnegies with steel, J.P. Morgan with finance, and they controlled the essential plumbing of the entire economy. They owned the oil, the steel, and the money. The source material says that ordinary people felt trapped and exploited by these new unaccountable forces. Now, let's fast forward to our digital age. We have a new set of titans, the data monoliths. You know the names: Google, Amazon, Facebook, and others. And what do they control? The essential plumbing of the new economy: search, e-commerce, and social connection. And the fuel for all of it is our data. the feeling is eerily the same. A 2019 Pew Research study, which is cited in the source, found that a whopping 81% of Americans feel they have lost control over how their personal data is collected and used. The commodity has changed from oil to data, but that concentration of power and that feeling of public helplessness, it feels like a direct echo from the past.
So if history shows us the problem so clearly, the good news is it also points us toward the solution. How did regular people fight back against the insane power of the Gilded Age titans? They didn't do it by themselves. They did it by joining together through collective action. And we can use those same proven ideas today, just updated for the 21st century.
The answer, back then, was cooperation. When people felt exploited by powerful companies, they teamed up. They formed trade unions so they could bargain together for better wages and safer factories. When they were getting ignored by the big banks, they formed cooperative banks, which we now call credit unions, to get fair access to loans and financial services. The modern version of these time-tested organizations is the data cooperative. A data co-op is an organization that's owned and governed by its members, and it manages data on their behalf. Now, the most important part of that definition is that it acts as their legal fiduciary. Fiduciary is a really powerful legal word. It means the co-op has a legal and ethical duty to act only in the best interest of its members. This is the polar opposite of the model we have now, where a platform's main duty is to its shareholders, which usually means making more profit by finding new ways to use your data. A data co-op flips that entire model on its head. It puts the members, the people who actually create the data, back in control.
So what does a data co-op actually do? Well, it uses collective power. As one person, you have zero power to negotiate with a giant tech platform. But a data co-op that represents millions of members, it can actually sit down at the table and negotiate for better terms on how member data is used. It can pool everyone's resources to hire the tech experts and lawyers needed to audit companies and government agencies to make sure they're following the law. Imagine getting an alert from your co-op that says, "Hey, we just audited this app and found it was secretly selling your location data. We're now taking legal action for all of our members." It could even use the collective data to get better deals for everyone, like negotiating for lower group health insurance rates by showing, with anonymized data, that the community is healthy, without ever revealing any single person's information. And most importantly, it can use that collective data for the good of the community itself, to plan better neighborhoods or push for better local services. In short, a data co-op gives regular people what we just don't have right now, a real powerful seat at the negotiating table.
And look, if this is all starting to sound like some kind of utopian fantasy, it's so important to realize that this model is already proven to work at a massive scale. The source points out that in the US alone, more than 100 million people are already members of credit unions. That's a cooperative model for banking that holds trillions of dollars in assets. It's a huge, mainstream part of our financial system. Or take another example, the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. This is another co-op that since the 1930s has brought electricity to communities covering over half the land area of the United States, places the big investor-owned utilities just ignored. These are not small fringe groups. They are powerful, mainstream forces that have literally shaped the country's infrastructure. Now, just imagine that same collective power, but applied to data. As the book says, the power of 100 million US consumers who control their data would be a force to be reckoned with. It would completely change the balance of power in the digital world and create real accountability where right now there is basically none.
This shift in power isn't just about playing defense or protecting yourself. It's about actually creating something new. It's about proactively using this new form of capital to build a more distributed, a more resilient, and a more prosperous society from the ground up. So let's look at a few real-world examples of how this could build a completely different kind of economy. Let's start with something huge, like building a community hydropower dam. Now, traditionally, a project this big would need tons of government money or huge investors from Wall Street who just want to make a quick buck. But the source describes a whole new model. The citizens and local businesses who are actually going to use the power, they buy digital tokens. These tokens aren't just for speculation, they're like digital shares that give them rights to the future electricity that the dam produces. This pooled money, this community-sourced capital, provides the hundreds of millions of dollars needed to actually build the plant. The result is a total game changer. The essential infrastructure isn't owned by some distant government agency or a faceless investment firm. It's funded, owned, and governed by the very community it serves. This creates stable, long-term financing that's actually aligned with what the community needs, making sure the benefits, both the clean power and the financial returns, stay right there in the community.
Okay, now let's go back to one of the most sensitive and siloed types of data there is, our health records. Like we talked about, this data is all locked away, which really slows down medical research. We need to analyze data from thousands of patients across tons of hospitals to find new cures for diseases like cancer or Alzheimer's. But we absolutely cannot violate patient privacy to do it. It sounds like an impossible choice, right? Well, the solution is a revolutionary idea called OPAL, which stands for Open Algorithms. The core idea is brilliant. Instead of moving the data, you move the algorithm. Here's how it works. A trusted, pre-approved algorithm, say one designed to test a new cancer drug, is sent to the hospital. It runs securely on the patient data right where it lives, safely behind the hospital's firewall. The raw, personal data never, ever leaves the hospital's control. The only thing that comes out is a safe answer, an anonymous, combined result, like, this drug helped 15% of patients with this specific genetic marker. This lets researchers combine insights from dozens of hospitals all over the world to make life-saving discoveries, all without ever moving or exposing a single person's private information. It just elegantly solves the conflict between scientific progress and personal privacy.
And this same principle of using our collective data for local good can transform our own neighborhoods. Research that's cited in the book from the MIT Media Lab shows this really powerful connection. The diversity of stuff in a neighborhood, shops, cafes, parks, libraries, is a great predictor of how many people will visit that area, which in turn is a great predictor of economic growth. So how could a community use this? A local data cooperative, managing the anonymized spending data of its members, could analyze that info to see what its neighborhood actually needs to thrive. It could help the city and local business owners answer questions like, hey, our community has 3 pizza places but no hardware store. Would a new hardware store actually work here and bring in more foot traffic for everybody? It lets communities move past just guessing and use their own collective data to make smart, evidence-based decisions that improve life for everyone who lives there.
So what all these examples show is that this kind of user-focused, decentralized, and more fair economy is actually possible. The technology is real, the models exist, but, and this is a really big but, it is not going to just happen by itself. Building this future needs more than just clever code. It requires a new set of rules, new kinds of institutions, and a new social contract that's designed for our digital age. This right here might be the single most important takeaway of all. Technologies like distributed ledgers, blockchain, and privacy-preserving tools like OPAL, they're the toolbox. They give us the technical foundation for a more transparent, secure, and trustworthy system. But what we decide to build with those powerful tools, that depends completely on our values and the human-centric rules we create to guide them. Technology is never neutral. Without the right kind of governance, these new tools could easily be used to create systems that are just as centralized and exploitative as the ones we have now, only way more efficient at doing it. The tools are a necessary piece of the puzzle, but they're not enough on their own.
So what does this new kind of governance actually look like? Well, it's built on a few key pillars. The first is a concept the book calls computational law. This is the idea that our laws and regulations should be as transparent and auditable as the technology they're supposed to be governing. So instead of some static law that gets passed once a decade, imagine rules that can be constantly tested and updated based on real-world data about whether they're working fairly, with the code of the regulation open for anyone to inspect. Second, and this is totally non-negotiable, is human oversight. The goal is not to hand over control to algorithms, it's to use them as powerful tools that help humans make better decisions. People have to always be in the loop and have the final say. That ties right into the third pillar, stakeholder capitalism. This is a commitment to building an economy that is legally designed to benefit all the stakeholders, customers, employees, the community, not just a handful of shareholders. And finally, none of this works without continuous auditing. We have to build systems that constantly measure themselves against the goals we set, things like fairness, privacy, security, to make sure they're doing what we intended and to fix them openly when they're not. And all of this leaves us with one last provocative thought. The tools and the blueprints to build a more distributed, resilient, and trustworthy economy are not science fiction anymore. They're here. From data cooperatives that give us a collective voice, to privacy-preserving tech that unlocks new scientific discoveries, to new models of community-owned infrastructure
The potential is just immense. The transition to an economy built on data as capital is happening. That's not really up for debate. The only question that's left is who will get to build it and who it will ultimately serve. Is it going to be a future that's designed for us by the same powerful few who are just using a new generation of tech to lock in their position? Or will it be a future that is built by us, for everyone, using these incredible tools to create a more equitable and participatory world? That is the choice that we now face.